I don't remember the first time I met Brad Silverberg at Microsoft, but I vividly remember the last meeting we had there. I'll tell you more about that conversation soon enough, but that meeting was the reason I've kept in touch. And it's why, when I started a podcast about leadership, I knew I wanted Brad to be one of my first guests. To say that Brad Silverberg has led an interesting life in the tech industry would be the epitome of understatement. His career reads almost Forrest Gumpian in how he has been a witness to, or more accurately a participant in, some of the seminal points in the development of the personal computer. He went from being there for the dawn of windowed computing to leading the version of Windows that launched the Microsoft juggernaut. He was even near the epicenter of the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, trying to ship software that very night. For a kid from Cleveland to live such a fascinating life would be a tale in itself. But his story is much more than that. This student of history made so much history himself by being a clear and thoughtful leader. How he got there, the clarity of vision that drove him at every turn, and the perspective that brings on the future is enthralling. Brad and I have had numerous long phone chats in the 20-plus years since that fateful meeting in my office in the Redmond West Microsoft campus. He often rebuffed my entreaties to record one of them, as he prefers the ski slopes and bike trails to the limelight these days. I eventually convinced him to sit down on the record a few weeks ago, and that's what this is all about. This is Leading Smart, the show about managing in the brainpower age. It's a field guide to the joys and challenges of leading and working in the modern workplace. I'm Chris Williams, your guide to the stories and ideas that I hope will inspire you to be a better leader in the world of knowledge work. This is the first of 3 episodes with Brad Silverberg. In this episode, he recounts how serendipity and vision drove his career. This is episode 203, part 1 of my conversation with Brad Silverberg. Brad Silverberg and I are both kids from Northern Ohio, me from Toledo, he from Cleveland. In a strange coincidence, we both ended up in Rhode Island in the early 1970s. I was in high school in Newport while he was at Brown University in Providence. We wouldn't meet in person, however, until some 20 years later at Microsoft. One of the things I've long been fascinated with is how people find their life's passion. A precious few people seem to feel it nearly from birth, but I find most people stumble across it through some random twist of fate. Brad's story was one of those.
It's actually, to me at least, an interesting story of serendipity, because in high school, I graduated high school in 72, graduated college in 76, and computers weren't a thing at all. I mean, I had no exposure to computers in high school, and I was not actually much of a science person in high school either. I was focused on political science, history, that kind of stuff. And while I loved math in high school and felt I was pretty good at math in high school, I thought, okay, what would I ever do with math for a career or whatever? So I was also pretty passionate about political science and history. So I went to Brown as a modern European history major or a political science major. And one of the attractions to Brown is that they have what's called an open curriculum. There's no distribution requirements. So you don't have to take so many credits of this subject or that subject or that subject. You don't have to be a well-rounded person. And I thought, oh, great. I don't ever have to take another math science course the rest of my life. I could just study history and political science and stuff. And freshman year, first semester, I'm standing in the registrar's line to fill out the last course on my course schedule. And I had the political science course, I had a history course, I had a foreign language course, German, and then I was going to sign up for linguistics. I loved languages too. So I'm standing in this long line, and this is obviously before anything was done online. And I looked over the shoulder of the person in front of me to see what courses he was signing up for. And he was signing up for a course called AM 51. I had no idea what AM 51 even stood for. So I pulled open the big, large course catalog, 4 inches thick course catalog book, and looked it up, and it said Applied Mathematics 51 Introduction to Computer Languages. I had no idea computers even had languages. I didn't even know what the applied mathematics department was. I said, well, I like languages, so maybe I'll take that course instead. So I crossed off Linguistics 101. I wrote in AM 51, and I said, I'll try it out and see if I like it or not. Now, the other thing that Brown had that was really very valuable to me was they had, you could take any course, pass, fail. So I thought, okay, freshman year, I'm coming from public school to an Ivy League college. I was pretty intimidated how I might be able to compete. So I decided to take most of my courses first semester, freshman year, pass, fail, just to ease myself into the college experience, try to get up to speed and not really have to worry about grades. So I thought it was a really incredible, valuable thing that Brown offered, because it did encourage kids to experiment and get out of their comfort zone, take classes that they might not otherwise take, because if I'm on a pre-law track, which is, you want to have good grades to get into a good law school, and having pass-fail was a real incentive for me to experiment with my course selection. So I said, okay, sure. I love languages. I have no idea what this means, but I'll take it. So I took the class, and for the first month or two, I was completely, utterly lost. I just didn't get it. It didn't click, and I was frustrated. And but I'm pretty stubborn, and while I had been tempted to drop the class in the first couple of weeks, by the time I really felt overwhelmed that I wasn't getting it, it was too late to drop the class. So I stuck with it. And then about 2 months into the class, and we were on the semester system, one Saturday evening, it just clicked. And okay, I get it now. The computer does exactly what I say, no more, no less. And I have to be very, very precise about what I say and what I don't say. And so I took the class. I did well in the class. I said, okay, I'll take the next course in a sequence. And I like that even more. Meanwhile, I'm still on this pre-law track, and I'm finding I'm spending all my time on my computer class and enjoying it a lot more than the other classes this was more about my future. So sophomore year, we had to sign up for the core class for computer science majors. Actually, we didn't even have a computer science major at that point. It was part of the applied mathematics department, computer science concentration. So sign up for the core class sophomore year, first semester. And it was a tough class. This was a class that was intended to separate
the wheat from the chaff.
The wheat from the chaff in terms of who was going to major in. And there weren't very many computer science majors in that day. And it was a boot camp. I was spending, 40, 50 hours a week just on that class outside of the class. And I loved it. I loved it. And so I kind of had tough meeting with myself, trying to figure out what am I going to major in? And while I understood what a pre-law track would be and how that could lead to a potentially successful career, my heart was in this computer stuff. And I decided I had no idea what I would do with a computer science degree at that point. This is still early 70s. And most people who were graduating computer science, they'd go work for defense companies, banks, IBM,
right.
all companies that I had no desire to work for. But I just was, it was a time of experimentation in my life, and this is what I was really passionate about. And I decided, okay, I'm going to major in computer science. So I changed my major, ended up majoring in computer science. My advisor at the time, I'm still very good friends with, Andy Van Dam, who wrote the classic computer graphics book. I was in Providence a couple of years ago for his 80th birthday party. And he's been my mentor throughout my career and changed my life. I mean, going around, ending up, I would have never ended up in computers had I gone to any other school, because it wouldn't have encouraged that type of experimentation. I would have.
Yeah, the cross-disciplinary stuff would never have happened, right?
I never would have experimented with something new. I would have stayed on kind of the track that I was on trajectory for. And so I switched to computers. I loved it. And after I graduated, though, I was still pretty immature, I'd say. And I wasn't really ready to go out into the world and make a living. So I did what a lot of people do in that situation, is I went to grad school and just kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit more to try to, because the jobs was, again, it was going to work for companies that really, they weren't me.
Yeah.
I wasn't the corporate type person, and I didn't want to go work for those type of companies. So I decided to go to grad school. I got a master's in computer science. And at that point,
there weren't many schools that had masters in computer science at that point, were there?
There weren't. MIT did, University of Toronto did, Illinois did. I think Berkeley's
Michigan did, because I was at Michigan right about then, and they did. But it was brand new.
It was new. I mean, the whole field was really new.
Yeah.
And so I ended up getting a master's, and my advisor wanted me to continue on to a PhD. But at that point, I kind of had enough of academia. I could see I was never going to be a first-rate computer science researcher. I'd be okay, but I wasn't going to be at the top. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll go get a job. And I had been to the West Coast in summer after I graduated college. I went with my then girlfriend on a cross-country road trip, and we went to California, and I fell in love with the West Coast, and I knew I was going to end up living on the West Coast. So I took a job at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, which I thought of as kind of a halfway house for academics. It was still academically oriented, but it was private industry.
The 1970s and 80s were a pivotal era in the development of personal computing, and the area now known as Silicon Valley was the center of that universe. The Stanford Research Institute, or SRI, was a spin-out of Stanford University to research and commercialize a broad range of developments. They invented the computer mouse and were heavily involved in the development of computer networking. SRI was part of transforming the defense industry-focused ARPANET into the Internet we know today. Also deeply involved at the time was Xerox. Though they had made their fortune in paper copiers, like many big corporations of the era, they invested heavily in research in a broad range of disciplines. One of the centers of that research was their Palo Alto Research Center, or PARC. There, too, they did some of the key work that turned into the computers we know today. For example, they created the first graphical computer interfaces. That transformed computing from a world filled with punch cards and command lines for engineers into the windows of wonder we all know today. In short, the valley of that era is now seen as hallowed ground in the development of computing, and Brad was in the middle of it. Were you recruited out of college there, or did you go and apply there? I mean, did you specifically go to SRI because you wanted to be there?
SRI was my second choice. My first choice was Xerox, Advanced Systems Development Division, which was a development division for PARC.
Yeah.
I had probably the worst interview of my life when I went to Xerox. I did a really terrible job, and I didn't get the job at Xerox. I did get the job at SRI, which was just down the street from PARC, and there were a lot of cross affiliations between SRI and PARC at the time. So I really enjoyed working at SRI. Doug Engelbart was there at the time. He invented the mouse and the augment system. And I was exposed to the work that was happening at PARC. Used some of the people who worked at PARC, got to use some of the machines, the Alto, the Dorado. I was just intoxicated. It was really a case of moving to the Valley in 1978, of right time, right place, and right skills, just perfect confluence of serendipity. Just as going into computers was serendipity for me, being in the Valley in the late 70s and early 80s, just as personal computers and graphical computing and internet and networking. We were on the ARPANET back then, and SRI was actually the very first site on the ARPANET. They developed packet switching networking at SRI, and so I was really in a cool place.
At this time in computing, the very early 1980s, Apple was just growing up from the Apple II computer that had been their origin. They started to develop a computer called the Lisa. Steve Jobs had visited Xerox PARC and was fascinated by the graphical computer interface. He felt it was a way to introduce computing to the masses. The project was a technical tour de force and an economic disaster, but it later paved the way for the Macintosh, which most assuredly was not. And Brad Silverberg was there. So how did you then move to Apple? Did it seem obvious?
Well, so as the personal computers are exploding and all this great, cool stuff, essentially from Xerox, got commercialized, I got tired of working at SRI on essentially defense contracts. The area I was in was programming methodology. So we were developing tools to help people become more productive and develop better code. I like that. But while like the real world is taking off, I'm missing out.
Yeah.
I'm missing out. Here I am in SRI.
You had the 1970s version of FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
Absolutely. I mean, here's all this incredibly exciting stuff, taking this really exciting and inspiring work that Xerox had done and taking it into people's homes. And so I'd looked at a number of companies that were taking essentially the work that Xerox was doing and commercializing it. And I interviewed at Apple, and they were working on the Lisa at the time. And so I got a job as an individual contributor writing code for Lisa Word, working for a guy named Tom Malloy, who was an incredibly great guy who had worked with actually Charles Simoni at PARC on the first version of Bravo. And so Tom was taking what he learned from Charles on building Bravo to the Lisa, and worked on that for a couple of years. And that was an exciting time. There was an incredibly smart, passionate, insightful group of folks on that team. And a number of those folks left the Lisa team to join the Mac team. And so I had a bunch of friends who were working on the Mac at the same time that was being developed alongside and in competition with the Lisa.
So then you moved on to Analytica, which was, I think at that point, it was just a startup, correct?
That's right. As much as I loved working at Apple on the Lisa, it was also pretty clear to me early on that the thing was going to be a commercial failure.
Oh.
I was just an individual contributor early on in my career, and I had some ideas about how software should be done, but these guys were the pros. They were the experts. They were my bosses. They knew what they were doing. So I kind of soldiered on, and then I saw basically the project was not particularly well managed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a commercial disaster. What was intended to be a single floppy 256K, $2,500 per computer ended up with a megabyte of RAM, required hard disk, and $10,000 price tag. And it was DOA. So I left a couple months actually before it shipped. It was done, but it hadn't, after RTM, before it was available, I could see this is not going to be successful. And it was going to be a bloodbath because Steve Jobs did not care for the Lisa team. He hated the Lisa team with passion, and the Mac was his baby, and it was a brilliant product, but it also had some fatal flaws.
It was the $2,500 single floppy 256K machine that you were talking about, really.
It was it was 128K.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be $1,000 and ended up at $2,500. So it had some fatal flaws in its initial implementation too that caused it to not be a commercial success for a number of years. But it had, many of the right ideas, much more than the Lisa did, and the way they went about that development process was much more in tune with how I thought a development process should go.
So you went to Analytica, right?
That's right. I figured once the Lisa failed, Steve was going to fire most of the people on the Lisa, which he did. And I didn't want to be around for that. So I left to work with a fellow that I had worked with at Apple, actually, who was a product manager on the Lisa, Eric Michelman. And Eric had gotten to be good friends with a guy named Adam Bosworth, who worked at Citibank at the time. And so started a company called Analytica to build a graphical database for the IBM PC. And we had a really, really strong team. We had some great ideas, but sometimes we're a little early. It was really before the graphical. We had to develop all the graphics. We had to develop all this stuff ourselves rather than writing on a standard platform. Windows 1.0 had been released in that time frame, but we could see that was building a product on top of Windows 1.0 wasn't going to be successful. So we had a lot of great ideas. We invented something which Eric later got the patent for on pivot tables. Adam, obviously, you know of Adam, and he went on to do many great things in his career. So we had a great team. We built a very interesting but not commercially successful product. We got acquired by Borland in 1985. And so I went to work for Philippe.
In the middle 1980s, personal computing was just coming of age. The creation of the IBM PC in 1981 really jump-started the industry. What followed was a fertile period of development with many companies entering the market. Some famous old names like IBM and Hewlett-Packard, as well as upstarts like Compaq, Dell, and of course, Apple. But what limited the market for personal computers was software. You could have all the hardware in the world, but without the programs to run on it, you had little more than an expensive box of electronics. This was the world Microsoft had rushed into with MS-DOS and later Windows. Yet beneath that, there was another problem. To write software, you need software. You need the programs that enable developers to create the word processors, spreadsheets, and other programs we all know and love. That's the world of developer tools, of computer languages. That's the world I spent much of my career in. In the 1980s, this was a very competitive world. and one of the bright stars in that arena was Borland. Founded by the mercurial Frenchman Philippe Kahn, Borland was famous for its many software development tools, most notably Turbo Pascal. And you sort of got back into the languages world at that point, right?
That's right. I always loved languages. And Borland's leading products at the time were obviously Turbo Pascal, written by Anders Heilsberg.
Yep.
And Sidekick, which was a little pop-up DOS TSR product. And then they acquired our product called Reflex, which was the graphical database. We bought Paradox, which you're obviously familiar with.
Yep.
We developed our own DBase clone that you probably remember.
We competed against, yes.
And we developed Turbo C. We developed Quattro spreadsheet product, Quattro Pro, a word processor, which wasn't all that great. But so yeah, I went to work for Borland. I ended up running R&D for Borland. We built really an amazing team of incredible developers who developed, I think, best in class products especially in the development tools area. And I think Quattro Pro and databases. Paradox was leading for PC based SQL databases. They did an incredible job there. It was a lot of Philippe was a gas to work for. The guy was a larger than life personality. He was a lot of fun. Probably the most fun boss I ever had. We did a lot of fun stuff together. Kept us laughing.
Well, that was one of the things I was going to say. You've had the privilege of working for three pretty larger than life human beings, right? You worked for Steve, you worked for Philippe, who is a unique character, and obviously you worked for Bill. Those people must have colored your view of what leadership looked like.
Absolutely. And they all had very different styles of leadership. And I learned different things from each one of them. Philippe, I really learned positioning and how to have fun and how to recruit a great team of software developers and give them a lot of freedom. That when you have really good people, you trust them and you let them go off and do great work. And Philippe was just a master. He was a genius at marketing and positioning and really that underdog mentality. And we just embraced being the underdogs and getting under Microsoft's skin, building products that we were really proud of.
On October 17th, 1989, just after 5 o'clock in the evening, the San Francisco Bay Area was hit with a magnitude 6.9 earthquake. Most of the rest of the country remembers watching the World Series game between the San Francisco Giants and the Oakland Athletics, which was just about to start. Or from the incredible pictures of the aftermath, including the pancaked Cypress Freeway viaduct, or the video of the cars on the Bay Bridge as it collapsed. Brad had a much more personal view of the quake.
We went through the earthquake in 1989 together. We were in the process of cutting the master disks for Quattro Pro when the earthquake happened. And it was probably the most terrifying moment of my life. We were in a 2-story building and the building shook like the floors were rolling like you were on the ocean surf, and ceiling tiles coming down, bookcases falling over, the sprinkler system overhead, and the building shaking. Like, okay, I'm on the second floor, and I am waiting at that moment for the building to collapse, and I'm gonna die.
Wow. Particularly from a guy from Ohio who is not really familiar with earthquakes, right?
It was terrifying. Finally, the building stopped shaking, ran out to the parking lot, and as we stepped onto the asphalt, your feet sunk into the asphalt.
Wow!
Because it had heated up. We were 2 miles from the epicenter.
Wow!
And that was a very psychedelic experience to have your feet slink down into the blacktop. But over the next week, the team pulled together. We set up computers. We salvaged what we could. We took tops off to let them dry out. Obviously, water and computers don't mix too well, but we were able to pull RAM chips from this computer and stick them in that computer and hard drives and cobble together enough of a group of machines that we could restart the build and get Quattro Pro out and shipped. And that was it's an incredible bonding experience to go through that with your team. And I loved working with people at Borland, and I loved the people. But I ended up leaving eventually because Borland was kind of a boom bust experience. We go through these great times. We'd ship a new product. It would do super well. Philippe would then come up with 10 more new ideas of products we should build. We'd hire a bunch of people. We'd overexpand. Then business would slow down and we'd have to go through layoffs. And layoffs are painful. Layoffs are really to have to go to people who are good people. This is not calling bad performers. This is good people who put their hearts, lives, and committed to the team. And you got to look them in the eye and lay them off. And it was really painful. And you go through that cycle a couple times. Do it once, you hope you never have to do it again. You do it twice, it's like, to do it after more than twice, it's like, I just felt that was how Philippe was wired and wasn't going to change.
At this point, Brad once again was drawn by the vision of computing for the masses. He had seen this vision time and again, first at SRI and at Xerox, then at Apple. And it was not a vision he could shake. So when Microsoft came knocking, it was hard to leave Borland, but he had to grab the chance to realize the potential he had seen for years.
I had been recruited by Microsoft. Obviously, I was known by Microsoft. Some of our products, they continued to win the PC Mag Tech Excellence Awards, which was kind of the big prize we were all aiming for. Philippe was a master at marketing and did a bunch of things that got Bill and Steve's attention.
I'm convinced that Fox Pro got on their radar because we won the PC Mag Tech Excellence Award. So
yeah, of course. If you were them, you'd do the same thing. You identify who are the best people at your competitors and you try to go hire them. So they came knocking in '89. Actually, this is before the earthquake, and offered me a position to be a VP in the applications division, running Excel and the database product that was under development at the time. At the time, Microsoft had maybe 8 VPs, maybe 10 VPs. I think there were only 3 product VPs. I had an offer. It was a good offer. But after a couple months of putting them off, I ended up deciding to stay at Borland. I was just too committed and loyal to my team. I loved my team. They loved working for me. And Microsoft they were the enemy. Let's put it that way, and to leave Borland to go to Microsoft was a really difficult. I almost felt like a betrayal.
Right.
Of everything that we had built at Borland. And so I ended up staying. There were some issues at Borland that I wasn't happy with. I discussed with Philippe, and he assured me that, okay, they would be changed if I stayed. So I stayed. And then, well, the commitments that were made to me after I said I stayed, they were a little more transitory, shall we say. And the things that I had hoped would change, particularly some of this boom bust stuff, wasn't gonna change.
That wasn't in Philippe's nature. He was very much a mercurial sort, and
he was. He's a great guy. He's incredibly creative and charismatic.
Enormous smile. I'll never forget that enormous smile.
Super fun to be around. We go skiing and wakeboarding or wake surfing and windsurfing and surfing and sailing and all kinds of incredible stuff together. I admired him. I learned an incredible amount from Philippe on how to build products that appeal to the masses and pricing and guerrilla marketing tactics and
right.
all that. And he was an incredible recruiter. He had a very good sense for acquisitions and acquiring companies for talent and building really first-rate development teams that I really enjoyed working with. It's a little bit coincidental, but maybe not 100%. Around Thanksgiving 1989, this was after the earthquake, I realized things at Borland really weren't going to change. And I gave it a little bit more thought, and I called Bill back and I said, Bill, if you've got a job for me that I get excited about, I'm ready to say yes. And so he came back to me and he said, how would you like to run the Windows and MS-DOS businesses? Now, this was at a time when Windows 3.0 was in beta. Okay. And I was a beta tester of Windows at Borland. Mm-hmm. And I had also used OS2 and been evangelized by Cam and Peter Newbert and all the Microsoft folks about OS2. I didn't think much of OS2. I didn't really think it was going to be successful, but as a beta tester Win 3.0, I thought, now this one has potential. This one, in some sense, was helping to I saw as having the potential to fulfill the vision that I had throughout my career of graphical computing for the masses, for everyday people, something which Xerox was never going to do. They were strictly focused on knowledge workers and big businesses. Apple, perhaps with the Apple II, had that, but with the Lisa and the Mac, they were really targeted towards a higher end, more elite user, and they high margins. They were never committed to going really broad mm-hmm. with their products, and I thought that was a huge missed opportunity. I thought I was in love with the vision of personal computers for everybody around the world at affordable prices, running on commodity hardware. That was never going to happen out of Apple. It's never going to happen out of another startup. But I saw that Windows 3.0 had the potential to be that product. So I did. Bill offered me that position. I said yes, and took a couple months to work out the details. And
so it was early in 90, right? When you moved?
Early 1990 that I said yes. It was like in February, I told Microsoft yes. But Philippe was in France. Philippe, as you know, is French. He mm-hmm. would spend quite a bit of time in France. And he was spending a couple months in France at that time. And this was something I needed to tell Philippe face to face. Send him an email or call him up on the phone and say, hey, I'm leaving the company that I'm head of R&D of, and going to Microsoft.
I'm headed over to the enemy, right? Yes.
You gotta put your big boy pants on and kind of, face the. Yeah, I know he's not going to be happy, but it's the right thing to do. And so I had to wait for him to come back from France. And first or second day back, I scheduled a meeting with him and told him I was leaving the company. And he said, where are you going? I told him Microsoft. And he had security escort me out the building right at that moment. It was a tough scene. There were a number of folks that wanted to have a farewell party for me, and Philippe sent out an email telling people they weren't allowed to do that, and anybody who had a farewell party for Brad was going to be fired or something. And it was a tough situation between me and Philippe for a couple of years. There was he was pretty upset. But it was also a complicated time for me, that intermediate period between when I had accepted the job at Microsoft, but I was still, for another 6 weeks, head of R&D at Borland. And I had to be 100% committed to Borland. I mean, sure. Ethically, I'm employed by Borland. I'm running Borland until the day I actually quit. I'm 100% true blue Borland person. And during that period, I had one of my top developers come to me and said, "Hey, Brad, I want to talk to you. I have an offer from Microsoft. What should I do?"
Wow.
And I told Chris, I talked him out of it. I said, "You don't want to go there. Look at all the cool stuff we're doing here at Borland," and raised all the negative issues about Microsoft. And I sold him on staying at Borland. And
what did he say to you after you left?
Well, obviously I felt guilty about it, and he was a little bit upset about it. But I explained to him, "Chris, what could I do?
Right.
Really, what could I do? I mean, as long as I'm in charge at Borland, I have to be 100% committed to Borland. I can't really think about what's good for Microsoft till I'm a blue badge of Microsoft." And I hope you can understand. I hope you can forgive me. And a couple of years later, he ended up at Microsoft. Those next couple of years at Borland were tough years. So I came to Microsoft in early 1990. I actually accepted the end of March. The Windows 3.0 launch was May 22nd in New York City. They kept my hiring confidential till after the announcement. They didn't want to disrupt the team or freak team leaders out. Like, they're just as they're getting ready to launch a product, to let the guy in charge know that you're going to be replaced. Probably not a good thing to do. So I was kept quiet. But those were the early 90s were tough for Borland. Again, it bought Ashton Tate, which was a really stupid move. It was really I think it was vanity on Philippe's part, because DBase at that point was going to die. DBase 4 was a terrible product. We had Paradox. Paradox had all the momentum in the world, or companies like Fox Pro were killing DBase in the DBase compatible market. We had a DBase product, and Ashton Tate was going to die, but Philippe bought it, and it became a huge distraction trying to digest Ashton Tate.
He also overpaid for Ashton Tate as well, right?
He overpaid, and it was really a move that led to the collapse of the company. And in those couple of years between 90 and 93, 94, a lot of really talented people left Borland, and quite a number of them came to Microsoft. I had a strict policy of non-solicitation, which meant I would never pursue them.
Was that a personal policy, or was that
something?
That
was a personal policy. It was kind of just what I felt was the right ethics. I still felt loyal to Borland, but even I didn't work there, and I felt loyal to Microsoft. And I did stay in touch with my good friends, and wanted to be top of mind should they ever decide that they wanted to leave Borland, that they would think, "Oh, hey, Brad's at Microsoft. Maybe I should give Microsoft a call." But I never initiated a conversation that said, "Hey, you should come to work for Microsoft." If they initiated the conversation, "Hey, I'm interested in coming to Microsoft," then sure, I would follow up and pursue that. And we did hire quite a number of Borland employees, enough so that Borland ended up suing. This is before you were in HR. Borland ended up suing Microsoft. I don't really think there was any legal basis, but because it's a free world. But we ended up signing a settlement agreement with Borland that we wouldn't hire more Borland, or some limited number of Borland people. I forget the details, for the next couple of years. But that was okay. As typically happens with companies that are struggling, the best people leave first.
Right.
And we got more than our fair share of incredible people, including, Anders Heidelberg, of course, who went on to do amazing things and still do amazing things at Microsoft, Peter Kuchel, and the list goes on and on of the number of people we got.
In the languages division, we got Sin Lu, who did some great stuff on the back end.
Sin. We got Paul Gross, we got Peter, we got Tanj Bennett, we got Chris Broom. Chris was the one who actually I referred to earlier in terms of he had early accepted the job with Microsoft. I talked him out of it. We got a number of the Danes. Borland was started really with Philippe, relationship with Danes. Dane Anders and a whole bunch of other people who developed Sidekick. It was kind of this gold mine of really talented developers that nobody in the world really knew of. And Philippe at Borland ended up hiring them or building contractual relationships. They were independent, but so we had a lot of Danes, and a number of the Danes came to work for Microsoft too. And I'd say out of the other top people who didn't come to Microsoft, probably the majority of them ended up going to Netscape. So it was a super, super talented group. We had a tremendous amount of fun together, and it really taught me a lot about software, positioning, building great teams, vision, culture.
That's where we're going to leave our conversation this time. Next time, Brad and I discuss his first leadership experiences and what makes a great leader.
I found I had a good talent for that. I found I had a really good talent for identifying young talent earlier on in their career, identifying their potential, and helping them reach that potential.
We'll also discuss how he became the father of Windows 95.
And I was very happy with the way Windows 95 turned out. It defined computing for a generation. We really made a difference to the world.
And we'll explore how his passion for the internet led to that fateful conversation that he and I had in my office when he decided to leave Microsoft. But that's next time. Leading Smart is from me, Chris Williams. You can find out more about the show and discover other resources for leaders at my website, clwill.com. If you like the show, please share it with your friends, especially on social media. Referrals are the greatest source of new listeners. And send me your thoughts, comments, and suggestions, either on the webpage for this episode or to pod@clwill.com. I'd love to hear from you. That's it for this episode. Next episode, we continue the conversation with Brad Silverberg. We delve deep into leadership and his chase for the vision of personal computing. Until then, please remember that each of the several dozen decisions you make today are part of Leading Smart.